3 weeks tomorrow, the NDP begins its meeting in Edmonton. On the agenda, Tom Mulcair's leadership. Ever since the election disaster for the NDP, there have been rumbles, but not too loud. This week, though, hasn't been kind to Mulcair, with a story a day, raising questions about whether he can hold on to the job. Andrew's here in Toronto tonight. Chantal is in Montreal, and Huffington Post Bureau Chief Althea Raj is in Ottawa. And Althea, I want to start with you. Difficult week for Tom Mulcair. Things looking tenuous if you just believe the stories you read. What is your take?
Yeah, I used to think that this was kind of a shoo-in for Mr. Mulcair, and I'm no longer convinced of that at all. When the NDP caucus resumed in January, they had a meeting where Mr. Mulcair was very much listening to what caucus members had to say, where he was telling them that he was going to take a more bottom-up approach to the party as opposed to top-down as he had been leading it in the past. And people seemed to be right behind him. But then this week we had Nikki Ashton, the Manitoba MP, who refused to say whether she supported him. And this morning in the paper, in the Timmins paper, we had Charlie Angus, another NDP veteran, who also refused to say whether he was going to back Mr. Mulcair. He would only say that he was listening to the party leader. He was anxious to hear Mr. Mulcair's vision for the future. And that is what Mr. Mulcair will be doing at the party convention in 3 weeks. On Sunday, he will have a chance, about 20 to 40 minutes, to give his pitch to delegates. And hopefully he will reach, in his mind, that 70% threshold that the party president has set out for him.
Well, add to those caucus problems, Chantal, you have some pretty influential members in Quebec suggesting this week it's time for renewal, code word for review, new leader, what have you. Didn't sound good either.
Well, they're probably more influential than they ever were in saying that. But that being said, I thought of all of the things that happened this week, though, that open letter from Quebec members, the Socialist caucus calling a news conference to say we want this guy gone, and the silence from caucus was the more significant. I agree with Althea that early on in the year, it seemed most of the caucus was going to rally behind Thomas Mulcair, and I'm assuming that's not what they're hearing in the ridings. And as for the notion that people who will show up in Edmonton will make up their minds on the floor of the convention on a 30-minute speech, I don't believe that's going to be the case. When they show up in Edmonton, they will have their minds made up. And it's going to be too late. It's going to be either enough or not enough, but it won't be decided by something that happens at the convention.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed earlier in another show whether or not he'd be okay because there was no visible opponent to him. There was no Aaron waiting, nobody waiting in the wings. But of course, as we've seen, it doesn't need to be. As bad as some of the overt opposition to him is, and Chantal mentioned some of the people who have come out, it's been more the silence of the people who might have supported him and really haven't. And of course, that silence in the last week has become louder, if you can put it that way. People are not just not coming out in favor, but making a show of doing so. So I'm not sure what is going to hurt him more is people actually, as I say, organizing against him, or just the apathy of those who might be okay with his leadership but aren't going to be as motivated to come to the convention and to make their views known.
What do you think went wrong here, aside from what happened on October 19th, or is it all about that? Because it did seem for a while there that he was going to be okay. He may still be okay, but it just seems a lot more difficult now. Chantal?
I don't know that it ever seemed one way or the other, and I don't know that it seems now unless we can read minds of NDP members and know who is going to Edmonton. But I do believe that when Thomas Mulcair was picked, there was not much of a link of affection between he and the party that chose him, that the deal was that they chose him because he was going to take them to power. And that didn't happen, and a lot of members think that the concessions that were made along the way were left the party in a bad position, or that his skills are not appropriate to the party's situation at this point. And there's no heart in them for keeping Thomas Mulcair. It was never a decision from the heart to choose him in the first place.
I agree with that. I think a lot of people also chose him because they thought he could keep Quebec. And in the last election, he showed that he couldn't. A lot of staff members, which I find really surprising, are even suggesting that they think he should leave and are really unsure that he has what it takes to stay, which is not something you usually see with a party leader. I think it has to do with the election, but I also think that Mr. Mulcair didn't do what the membership wanted him to do, which is on election night say he was sorry and take full responsibility for what happened. That didn't really happen until a letter in February, and even then it was kind of a timid response. I think they were really hoping he would do a mea culpa.
All right, I want to move it to Justin Trudeau in New York in the last couple of days. A couple of issues to bring up here. First of all, a bit of a tiff surrounding a phrase that is not uncommon, I don't think, in new governments where they try to claim, they come in, they say it's a new Canada and Canada's back or what have you. It's something that Justin Trudeau has been saying in one way or another over the last few weeks. He said it in New York yesterday and immediately got a response from Peter MacKay, who we haven't heard much from in the last little while. Watch this. First of all, here's Trudeau.
My friends, it's time. It's time for Canada to step up once again.
So that's Justin Trudeau. Here's Peter MacKay. My initial reaction to that was, what a slap in the face to our foreign service and our UN staff and personnel. And I got to be honest, especially as a previous foreign minister, when I hear the phrase Canada is back, didn't actually use those words, but close to it, I can't help but wonder aloud, where in God's name does this Prime Minister think we've been? Andrew, what do you make of this?
Well, you're right to say that the Harper government, when they came in, had some phrase similar to that, Canada is back. Both parties, either party wants to engage with the world, will do so in different ways. They will have different ideological convictions. They'll have appealing to different constituencies. They will have a different strategy and approach, and that's perfectly appropriate. What's not appropriate is for either of them to be saying, well, we're the true representations of Canada. We're the party that embodies Canadian values. And we see this war now going on, not just on this front, but domestically of, the Charter of Rights. The Tories refuse to acknowledge the 30th anniversary of the Charter of Rights. The Liberals are now busily going through and erasing every reference to the War of 1812 from the citizenship handbooks that the Tories put in. It's silly. We are a country that's diverse enough that we're both a peacekeeping and a war-making tradition. We have a bipartisan tradition of both protecting civil liberties and on occasion violating them. We have to get over this business of one party or the other claiming that they're the true representatives of the Canadian values. It's too simplistic and too self-interested.
Meant to mention that MacKay's remarks came in an interview he gave with our friend David Aiken, bureau chief at Sun Media, and I think he works for Post Media as well. I mean, they're all connected, right, Andrew? We don't have to worry about that. Chantal, what do you think of this?
Well, if you cover federal politics as you have or I have for long enough, you'll hear everything, including the notion that it's now a matter of glory that our Prime Minister is having state dinners at the White House when his predecessor, Jean Chrétien, was proud to say that he wouldn't be cozying up to the American president. So it's almost childish, the entire debate over Canada's back. On this, I grant Peter MacKay half a point. We weren't anywhere. We were still on the planet. I'm not aware we went to outer space. But I don't give him any points for the foreign affairs officials who would feel frustrated by those comments, because I watched them give an ovation to Stéphane Dion when he came in the Foreign Affairs building after the swearing in, and they looked like people who believed they'd been liberated.
All right, one of the other things that happened in New York over these last couple of days, aside from the visit to the UN, was the Prime Minister's discussions today with Bloomberg in front of a full audience and television audience, where he seemed to be dropping, on occasion, the odd leak as to what will be in next Tuesday's budget. Now, Althea, you were watching all that. We're starting to see the shape of that budget beyond the debate around the deficit number.
Yeah, I mean, he told us things that we expected, like that the long-promised OAS age from 67 back to 65, that they were going to announce that in the budget, which was a campaign promise. But he also suggested that the Liberals' infrastructure plan, which they campaigned on, won't really kick in for another 2 years. He said that the next 2 years are going to be infrastructure, but the sort of unsexy infrastructure. So things like subway signals and things that happened underground that you don't see. And that isn't necessarily, I think, what a lot of people felt they were going to get. They thought they were going to get, massive public transit infrastructure and childcare spaces. And so that's going to be interesting.
There used to be a tradition known as budget secrecy. We still observe it with the annual ritual where we lock the press up half the day. It's ridiculous. Most of the budgets nowadays are leaked well ahead of time, either informally by unnamed advisors or in this case by the Prime Minister himself. It certainly is mostly in keeping with the shape of things that they talked about in the election, although the numbers that we're talking about are much larger now, $30 billion deficits rather than $10 billion. But I can't say that any of this is terribly surprising. It's pretty much been telegraphed in advance.
There was indications from him today as well that the Bombardier help is forthcoming, is likely to be coming from Ottawa. He didn't say it outright, but he talked about how aircraft companies in different parts of the world get subsidies, and and left the impression that Canada would continue on that line. Now, I don't think that'll be coming in the budget, but it may set the groundwork for something else in the budget, which would be the money to Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, who are suffering because of the oil price situation, although I see the oil price is up over $40 today. Chantal, what did you take out of those remarks today?
Well, Bombardier, we already know that they've punted forward. That was supposed to happen before the budget. It's not going to, and it probably won't happen the day after the budget. Relief measures on EI, in particular, for regions such as Alberta, but not exclusively Alberta, that have been hard hit by this slump, I believe will appropriately come in the budget. But I'm not expecting to have, a Marshall Plan for Alberta and Newfoundland in that budget.
Tell me more on that. You don't think there's going to be any major aid to those provinces?
I don't see what the federal government would do beyond relief measures that have already been discussed with Alberta in particular in the budget, no?
What's interesting is they have so many people who have such expectations that they're going to deliver for them that you could very quickly balloon way beyond $30 billion if they tried to meet all of them. What's been interesting is that you're hearing both from, again, unnamed advisors and from the Prime Minister himself, is that the deficits they're going to run are not really about short-term stimulus, since we're not in recession and this really wouldn't be appropriate. It's just because they'd like to borrow the money to be able to spend the money. It's for the oldest fashioned of reasons. So goodbye to all those Bay Street economists who thought this was about old-fashioned Keynesian stimulus. This is just, we'd like to spend more than we're taking in.
What are you hearing, Althea?
Well, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I mean, I think that he made the point when he talked about, we need more than monetary policy to sort of get out of the sluggish growth, that he wants to use the tools that he has at his disposal to sort of kickstart the economy, but he's not willing to say, this is a stimulus package and you're going to see benefits right away. The other thing I thought was a bit interesting today was he made a point of saying, I believe in fiscal responsibility. So I don't expect that the budget deficit is going to be higher than $35 billion, because then he's really going to get slammed.
So that's where fiscal responsibility comes in, that you don't have that responsibility once you go past $35 billion deficit?
Well, their math has been wrong on a number of things, like First Nations education, for example. They thought there was $1.2 billion there, but really there wasn't. For example, the tax changes were supposed to be revenue neutral and there wasn't. So, adding a $3 billion cushion for their math being wrong, I think that you're in that sort of $28 to $32 billion range.
But we have no idea what their definition of fiscal responsibility is. It was going to be balancing the budget at the end of their term. It was going to be not allowing the debt to GDP ratio to go up. They've blown through all those. So what's their benchmark?
Well,
you get the last word, Chantal.
Maybe we'll see next week, but I expect them to try to stay around $30 billion. Whether you qualify that as terrible or a sign of restraint, I'm going to hold my fire until I read that budget.
Yeah. It's amazing how they've moved the $10 billion to $30 billion, and everybody's now saying, well, they'll keep it to 30, or they just keep it under 30, tending to forget that at one point, not that long ago, it was 10.
It was a good communications plan.
Right. Okay. Listen, a note about next week, while we have you. At Issue will be on Tuesday as we cover that day's budget. And on that night, Jennifer Ditchburn will be joining Andrew on Chantal. So, Althea, thanks very much. Chantal in Montreal, Andrew here in Toronto.